This video is for Algebra Section 9.3. Our learning goal: the learner will apply knowledge of trinomials to factor trinomials in the form x squared plus bx plus c. So everything we do is going to be in that form, or we'll be able to put it into that form. Our vocabulary isn't really a vocabulary term, it's really just what we're going to be doing. We're factoring x squared plus bx plus c, so every time you want to do that, you'll need to find two integers, m and n, whose sum is equal to b and whose product is equal to c. And you're basically going to change this into something times something, a binomial times a binomial, basically. And every time, whatever this first thing was, will go here. And then m and n are numbers you need to figure out, basically guess till you get the right one, that you can multiply together to get this last number, c, and you can add together to get b, the middle number. In order to do this, you will need to know FOIL, you will need to know zero product property, and you will need to know solving equations. All those will be necessary to be able to do this. Okay, let's go on to the problems. Number one. Now, number one, I have x squared plus 4x plus 3. So I'm going to set up my two sets parentheses. So we're going to start with every time. First one obviously has to be x, because x times x will give me x squared. Okay, these are all plus signs, so I don't have to worry about any negatives. What could I multiply together to get 3 and add to get 4? Well, the only thing I can multiply to get 3 is 3 and 1, and 3 plus 1 is 4, so that's it, 3 and 1. If you want to know why that works, that's because of FOIL. If you want to check your answer, you can use FOIL. So I could do first x times x, that's x squared. Outside, x times 1, that's x. Inside, 3 times x, that's 3x. And last, 3 times 1, which is 3. These are like terms, so you would put them together and get 4 x's and bring everything else down, which is what I started with, so that means my answer works. Okay, if you can do FOIL and you get the answer you started with, that means that your factoring worked. So these things were correct. Okay, we're not going to check all of them, but that's why they work, and you need to understand that that's why they work. So number 3 is r squared minus 3r plus 2. And I'm going to set up my two sets of parentheses. I'm going to put r and r. Now I've got a negative here. When that happens, we have a negative and a positive. You need to think about that. That means when I multiplied, I'd get positive. But when I add, I would get negative. The only way that can happen is if I have a negative times a negative, that gives me positive, and a negative plus a negative gives me a negative. Then the only things I can multiply together to get 2 is 2 and 1, and 2 plus 1 is 3. And technically negative 2 plus negative 1 is negative 3, so it does work. So r minus 2 and r minus 1. That works. Number 5. We have x squared minus 4x minus 21. Put the x and the x. Now I've got both of them negative. Well, if I multiply and I get a negative, you should know I have to have different signs to get that. So I have to have a positive and a negative. And if I'm adding them and they're a positive and a negative, technically you're subtracting the absolute value. So what could I multiply together and get 21 and subtract and get 4? Well, 7 times 3 is 21, and 7 minus 3 is 4, but that would be positive. So I want the negative to be on my 7 because I have more negatives than positives to get negative 4. Okay, number 7. C squared minus 4c minus 12. Alright, I can put c and c. These are both negatives, so again I'm going to have a positive and a negative. What could I multiply together to get 12? And in this case, subtract and get 4. Well, if I multiply 3 and 4, I get 12. 3 minus 4 is not 4. What about 2 and 6? 2 times 6 is 12, and 6 minus 2 is 4. But I want more negatives, so my 6 is bigger, so it should go with the negative. That way I get my negative 4 when I add them. Number 9. And I'm going to rewrite number 9 in the right order. It's x squared minus 10x plus 9. was written differently on your paper. They're trying to confuse you. Don't let them do that. X squared means it's going to be x and x. A negative here and a positive here means it's going to be a negative and a negative, because negative times negative is positive. Negative plus negative is negative. We're going to multiply together and get 9 and add and get 10. 3 times 3 is 9, but 3 plus 3 is not 10. 9 times 1. 9 times 1 is 9, and 9 plus 1 is 10. Number 11. We have a squared plus 8a minus 9. So I'm going to put my a and my a. This is a positive and this is a negative. It means I'm going to have one of each, and they're going to be more positives. So what could I multiply together, get 9, subtract and get 8. It's almost the same as that problem. So I'm still going to use 9 and 1, because 9 minus 1 is 8. Because the signs are different this time, it works differently. Alright, number 13. We have x squared minus 2x minus 3. Set up my two sets of parentheses, put my x and my x. These are both negative. I'm going to have a positive and a negative. And I'm going to have more negatives. So the 3's got to be negative, the 1's got to be positive. And negative 3 plus 1 is negative 2. And 3 times 1 is 3. That works. Number 15. We have m squared plus 9m plus 20. And m and m. These are both positive, so these are going to be positive. What can I multiply together and get 20, and add together and get 9? 4 and 5. 4 times 5 is 20. 4 plus 5 is 9. Number 17. We would have a squared minus 14a plus 24. Okay. So again, I'm going to have a and a. Can I multiply? Oh, first of all, look at signs. We got a negative here, put a positive there. A negative times a negative gives me a positive. Negative plus negative gives me negative. We're going to multiply together to get 24 and add together to get 14. Well, 8 times 3 is 24, but 8 plus 3 is 11. 6 times 4 is 24, but 6 plus 4 is 10. 2 times 12. 2 times 12 is 24, and 2 plus 12 is 14, so that works. Good. Number 19. We have x squared plus 2xy plus y squared. Okay, this one may look a little different, but it's the same idea. We've still got the x squared, so that's x and that's x. And that also means we kind of ignore this x right here. But we know we have to multiply together to get y squared and add together to get 2y. Well, y times y is the only thing that's going to give me y squared. And y plus y would give me the 2y. The x is in our formula, so we don't need to worry about it. So it's just x times x plus y times x plus y. Number 21. That's kind of the same idea. We have x squared plus 6xy minus 7y squared. Again, set up my two sets of parentheses, put my x and my x, which means this x here doesn't really matter when we're trying to guess. We know we need a positive and a negative to get this negative. And we know there's going to be more positives because the middle end is a positive. So my guess would be 7y and y, because 7y times y is 7y squared. And 7y minus y is 6y. And that x is part of the formula. If you did FOIL, it would be in there. Alright, let's go to the next page. Number 1 on the next page. Only thing different with these, you should notice there's a little extra part on the end. Basically, these are equations instead of expressions. They have equals 0. I'm still going to do the exact same thing. I have to factor it, so I can find what I can multiply together to get that. So this is going to be x, this is going to be x. That was a negative, so that means I got negative and a negative. And 3 and 1 would give me 3, and add them would give me 4. Which means this times this equals 0. Well, if that's true, one of these has to be 0, or both of them. So either x minus 3 is 0, or x minus 1 is 0. And then solve your equation by getting x alone. And my x could be 1 or 3. For all of these problems from 1 to 15, you should have 2 answers. If you only come up with 1 answer, you've done something wrong. You have to get 2 answers. Okay, number 3. We have m squared plus 10m plus 9 equals 0. So again, I'm going to factor it. I've got an m and I've got an m. They're both positives. And I'm going to multiply to get 9 and add to get 10. So it's got to be 9 and 1. Which means either m plus 9 equals 0 or m plus 1 equals 0. If I subtract 9, m's negative 9, m is negative 1. So it's either negative 9 or negative 1. One of those. Alright, on to number 5. We have x squared minus 4x equals 5. This is almost the same, but the 5's on the wrong side. I need it to equal 0 to be able to do factoring and saying I know one of them 0. So that's easy to solve. I can just subtract 5. So everything's on the same side. So I do x squared minus 4x minus 5 equals 0 because those would give me 0. Now I can solve it the same way. I'm going to factor it. I know it's got to be x and x. These are both negative. So I've got to have a positive and a negative, and I've got to have more negatives. So negative 5 and positive 1 would give me the 5, and add them and I get negative 4. So either x plus 1 equals 0, or x minus 5 equals 0. Subtract 1, x equals negative 1, add 5, x equals 5. One of those things has to work. Alright, let's try number 7. Number 7, we have c squared minus 8 equals negative 7c. Again, it's just written wrong, so I want to move this. I want this to be over here in between. So I've got to add 7c to get it over where it should be, so I have c squared, c's, and numbers. So I'm going to have c squared plus 7c minus 8. These would cancel, which will give me my 0. So I can set up my 2 sets of parentheses. And I know it's going to be c and a c. And I have to multiply to get a negative, so they've got to have a positive and a negative. There's got to be more positives to get positive 7. So positive 8 and negative 1, because 8 minus 1 would give me 7. That works. So c plus 8 equals 0, or c minus 1 equals 0. Subtract 8. C is negative 8, or add 1. C is 1. Alright, so again I got my 2 answers. I'm going to clear the page. On to number 9. Number 9 is written all on the same side, but it's written backwards. So when I write it down, I'm going to write it in the right order. You should be able to do that too. So x squared, negative 8x, and negative 9. Okay, set up my 2 sets of parentheses. Gotta have x and an x. And I've got to get a negative here, so I have to have a positive and a negative. And then I need to subtract basically and get negative 8. So I gotta have more negatives. So negative 9, positive 1. X plus 1 equals 0, or x minus 9 equals 0. Subtract 1. X equals negative 1. X equals 9. So it's either negative 1 or 9. Number 11. We have a squared equals 11a minus 18. Again, it's written the wrong places, so I want to move these. You always want to make the squared one be positive. So I'm going to move the other 2 things. So I'm going to select subtract 11a, and add 18. I'm going to do them both at the same time if that's alright with you. Okay, on both sides, so those will both cancel. I'll get my 0. So I have a squared minus 11a plus 18 equals 0. Now I can factor it. Got an a and an a. I've got to have two negatives to get a positive there and a negative there. Minus, minus. And what could I multiply to get 18 and add to get 11? 2 times 9. 2 times 9 is 18, and 2 plus 9 is 11. So that means either a minus 2 equals 0, or a minus 9 equals 0. Add 2. A equals 2. Add 9. A equals 9. That's it. Number 13. We have x squared equals 24 minus 10x. Again, I want everything on the other side, so I've got to subtract the 24 and add the 10x. That'll get everything to cancel. If I do that on the right, I have to do it on the left. So I can do minus 24 plus 10x. Those are gone, those are gone. When I rewrite this, I'm going to write it in the right order. And equals 0. Now I can factor. Gotta have an x and an x. I'm going to have a positive and a negative. More positives. Positive and negative. What could I multiply together to get 24? And because they're different signs, subtract to get 10. 2 times 12. But I got to have more positives, so my 12 goes here, my 2 goes there. And it doesn't matter which order you write these in, by the way. If you have x minus 2 and then x plus 12, it's not going to matter. It doesn't matter which way you put it, as long as the positives with the 12 and the negatives with the 2. So x plus 12 equals 0. X minus 2 equals 0. If I subtract 12 here, x equals negative 12. Or over here, I would add 2. And x would be 2. So one of those two is my answer. Alright, moving on to 15. We have b squared equals 10b minus 16. Alright, again I'm going to subtract the 10b and add the 16 to get everything over here. Minus 10b plus 16. So I have b squared minus 10b plus 16 equals 0 because that cancels and that cancels. Set up my two sets of parentheses. I have a b and a b. And I've got to have two negatives to give me a positive when I multiply and a negative when I add. So what could I multiply to get 16 and add to get 10? 2 times 8. 2 and 8. So either b minus 2 equals 0 or b minus 8 equals 0. Add 2. And b equals 2. Add 8. And b equals 8. Alright. That's it. And that is the end of basically the problems where you're just solving it because. The last three problems on your page are actually examples of where you would use this. So these are some good examples of things people really do with this that you really would use. And they give you a formula. It says h equals vt minus 16t squared. So that's the formula for all these problems. For number 17, we're talking about a baseball. It says a ball is thrown up with an initial velocity, which is basically speed, of 32 feet per second. How many seconds will it take for the ball to return to the ground? Well, if the ball's on the ground, what's the height? It's on the ground, so there is no height, so the height's 0. They told me the velocity is 32, so v is going to be 32. And basically, I'm trying to find out what time is, right? Trying to find out how long that takes. Okay. Well, you should be able to say, well, I can divide a t out of both of these, and I can divide a 16 out of both of those. So I'm going to do that, 16t. So if I did 32t divided by 16t, I would get 2. And 16t squared divided by 16t, I would get t. So those two things multiplied together would give me 0, which means one of them is 0, or the other one is 0. If I solve this one by getting t alone, t would be 0. And this one I would have to add t to solve it. And t would be 2. So then this is a real situation. There really is two answers that are possible, but only one that's right. So think about throwing a ball. It's thrown up at a speed and returns to the ground. Is the time that I'm looking for going to be 0 seconds or 2 seconds when it returns to the ground? Well, 0 is where it started, so 2 is where it comes back to the ground. It is on the ground twice, which is why these situations come up with two answers. Okay? And that is the end of section 9.3 algebra video.